Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we are looking at a deeply profound, honestly almost spiritual relationship between two entities you probably wouldn't normally pair together like this: South Korea and the United Nations. We're going to unpack a super fascinating philosophical and geopolitical argument from our source material. It basically suggests that the entire world is watching, waiting to see exactly how a debt of unimaginable magnitude is going to be repaid. So buckle up, because we are preparing for a deeply emotional, thought-provoking journey as we examine a totally unique perspective on history, sacrifice, and our global duty.
Section 1. This cemetery in Busan.
Okay, let's dive into this. The UN Memorial Cemetery is located in Busan, South Korea. Now think about this for a second. You've got these young men and women from all over the world, right? They fought in a completely foreign land during the horrific Korean War, and then they went back and lived out their entire lives in their home countries. Yet when they pass away decades later, a really surprising number of them request to have their remains returned to South Korea, just to be buried in this one specific cemetery in Busan. And their families actually honor these wishes, flying them all the way back across the globe. I mean, why? What is drawing them back to a place of such profound past trauma?
Well, the source material offers a truly striking, almost spiritual answer to this mystery. It argues that this phenomenon goes way, way beyond it just being some battlefield where they once fought. The idea here is that the ideology and the energy of the moment, when humans most purely dedicated themselves to the public good, it literally remains right there. It's like this concentrated, pure energy of selfless sacrifice, giving your own life for absolute strangers. That creates an indelible mark, you know? It acts like a magnetic pull of human nobility that draws the souls of these veterans right back to the very earth where they gave their all for humanity's freedom.
And this brilliantly illustrates a stunning and honestly highly unknown reality. Most of us know about the Vatican, right? A sovereign religious territory existing completely within the borders of Italy. It's its own entity. Well, get this. The UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan operates on a very similar principle. Even though it is physically located right there in the middle of Busan, it is not actually South Korean land. No, it is sovereign UN territory. The South Korean government specifically carved out this chunk of land and just handed it over to the United Nations. It's a completely unique piece of international soil, sitting entirely within the borders of a single nation, utterly dedicated to honoring that ultimate sacrifice.
Section 2. The UN's greatest achievement.
So let's walk through this historical arc together to really get the context. Back in the 1950s, a devastating war brought South Korea literally to the brink of absolute destruction. In response, the United Nations gathered the world. Troops from 16 different nations came together under the UN flag, sacrificing absolutely everything to save a dying, deeply impoverished nation. Now, fast forward through the decades, and we see South Korea's miraculous growth. It rapidly rebuilt itself from the ashes into this wealthy, technologically advanced powerhouse that we all know today. But look at where we are right now. Today, the UN itself is facing an existential crisis. It's struggling just to maintain its footing, while a now wealthy South Korea kind of simply watches. The source argues that gathering the world to save Korea remains the UN's absolute greatest achievement to date. But, as we'll see, that achievement has led to a really complicated present.
And here, the source introduces a fascinating spiritual perspective. It frames this entire history not just as dry geopolitics, but as a literal cosmic test. It suggests that a higher power, the heavens, watched as the UN intervened to save Korea. And now, well, having successfully nurtured this nation into incredible prosperity, the universe is just watching and waiting. What is this highly capable, highly successful nation going to do now? Will it recognize the monumental, blood-soaked effort it took to save it, or will it just kind of sit back and enjoy its wealth in isolation?
Which brings us to Section 3, a forgotten debt of gratitude.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this source highlights a very stark, very uncomfortable imbalance. On one hand, you have the UN's past sacrifice, shedding blood for a total stranger, fighting for humanity's freedom, giving everything to save a nation. But on the other hand, the source depicts South Korea's current posture as focusing only on its own economic growth, forgetting to be thankful, and completely ignoring the very real struggles the UN faces today. It is a harsh critique, for sure. It's highlighting a severe lack of reciprocity.
And what exactly are those struggles the UN is facing right now? Well, the source bluntly describes the current geopolitical climate as a gangster-like world. The UN, this massive institution founded on these incredible, noble ideals, is currently struggling to simply keep the lights on and operate. It is facing a massive existential threat where financial dependence threatens to completely dictate its actions. The argument being made here is that the UN is increasingly pressured to just side with the nations that pay the highest dues. It's essentially holding its noble purpose hostage to funding. The organization that once saved nations unconditionally is now completely bogged down by transactional global politics. To really understand the depth of South Korea's failure in this specific context, the source introduces a deeply ingrained Korean cultural concept, uri, or uri. Uri is a fierce, deep sense of loyalty, righteousness, and a profound obligation to repay a life-saving debt. We're not just talking about a casual, hey, thanks man here. It is a strict moral imperative. The speaker emphatically points out that South Korea is currently failing to show this essential uri to the United Nations. Basically, they are failing the core moral test of their very own culture by turning a blind eye to the institution that gave them their existence.
So the crucial point is this next concept, chonson, or chonson, which translates to descendants of heaven. In this philosophical framework, chonson refers to true, enlightened leaders who are meant to live by the principle of hongik ingan, which essentially means to broadly benefit all of humanity. The source delivers a really heavy warning right here. By ignoring the UN and focusing only on hoarding their own national wealth, South Koreans totally forfeit their spiritual right to be called chonson. Because, let's be real, you cannot claim to be a global leader meant to benefit humanity if you completely abandon the very institution that bled for you.
Let's move to our final part, Section 4, a new global duty.
Let's see how this all builds into a practical yet highly elevated action plan. The speaker outlines very specific directives for South Korea to step up and rescue the UN. Step 1 is realization. You've got to fully grasp this historic and spiritual duty. Step 2 is action. Society's leaders must actively research and launch a global Save the UN movement, basically ensuring the UN can operate freely without all that financial extortion we talked about. And finally, Step 3 is the ultimate goal, stepping up into the role of great global leaders, acting not just for national self-interest, but for the actual benefit of all humanity. The source calls this the turning point. South Korea absolutely must undergo a massive shift in its national mindset. Look, the era of merely trying to survive, of frantically building up the economy just to avoid starvation, that's over. That was the past. The questions we have to ask today are so much larger. How will we live for the international community? What are we going to actively do for humanity? The call here is to elevate ourselves from being petty, self-interested individuals into great, expansive global thinkers. And the source actually grounds this massive call to action in a very specific moment in time. The speaker notes their own visit to the Yue Memorial Cemetery in Busan during June, which, if you didn't know, is the month of patriots and veterans in South Korea. This visit wasn't just for tourism, right? It was described as a time to make a solemn, spiritual promise to the fallen souls resting there. A promise that South Korea will finally awaken, that it will rise to its duty, and that the ultimate sacrifice made by those young UN forces will absolutely not have been in vain. Which brings us to the core challenge of this entire explainer. It's something I want you to really think about. When the very institution that literally saved your life is dying, what is your ultimate responsibility to the world? It totally shifts the way we look at global politics, doesn't it? From mere paper treaties to incredibly deep moral obligations. How do we repay these systemic, historic debts that allow us to thrive today? Let that sink in.